we just happen to be talking about how do we handle the criminal element. We haven't even touched on how we handle investment in the community. There's no phrase about housing matters. There's no phrase about healthcare matters. We haven't even gotten there yet. We start at the basics. Why? Because deep down, we're talking about protecting the privileged. And so we have to come up with phrases that assault your sense of, that assault you, period. That assault your sense of equality. It assault your sense, your understanding of the way things are. You're afraid to empower a phrase like Black Lives Matter because in the land of Oz, and you've taught your kids all lives matter. You don't necessarily act that way. And I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about society. I'm talking about the systemic obstacles that separate us, regardless of our individual views.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Phillip Nelson.
Welcome back to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversation podcast. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein. And I look forward to having a discussion with Dr. Phil today about Black Lives Matter. Enjoy. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. And every time I talk to you, I get more motivated to try to make change. And I think just having and starting conversations, because I know within SCVMA, within AVMA, within our communities, there are people who are not open-minded.
Yes.
And at the consultants level, there are people who resent the fact that we want to focus on Black Lives Matter, and they think that all lives matter. Well, in a small a, yes, all lives matter. But right now, the world needs to focus on Black Lives Matter. It's a completely different discussion. So,
if you could, you should ask them, what do they find offensive about Black Lives Matter? If we're going to have courageous conversation, we have to force people to be introspective. You have to force that. You have to challenge them to look at themselves as you are so willing to do. And so you have to accept that when they say, I don't like that all lives matter. Well, one of my responses is, so would it be better if we said Black Lives Matter too? I'm trying to figure out just what your issue is. If all lives matter, then why is Black Lives Matter offensive? The statement doesn't say only Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Why do you take it that way? And then that will force him, and hopefully if he's really thinking, and if he still wants to be argumentative, he'll ask the question, well, then why do you have to highlight that Black Lives Matter? And then I got him, because then I get to say, because the behavior suggests that all lives don't matter. Don't you think it's odd that I even had to come up with the phrase?
Yeah.
And your unwillingness to accept Black Lives Matter means that you're unwilling to accept that Black lives are treated differently. And I'm trying to force you to face that fact. Now, if you don't like it, then we're not going to be able to get across the bridge.
Good. You
know, you see what I'm saying? This is not just a simple phrase.
No.
And this is not an English exercise.
Right.
Okay. This is more than a soundbite. You are trying to counter a message with a soundbite. You're playing politics with my life because you don't want to hear that my life is at risk. This is your shining moment right now when it comes to white privilege.
Yeah.
And so when anybody comes back with all lives matter, they're going to start an open conversation with me. We're not leaving unless you leave.
Yeah, well, it's gotten some hackles up and it's pissed off a lot of people.
You raised the hackles?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I posted resources for people to read on it being an anti-racist and all of the, and I got an email from a member who basically said our community listserv shouldn't be used for contentious issues. I said, and the board basically said, what the heck are we using our community listserv if it's not for contentious issues?
That's good. Good. Yeah. Well, see, once again, if we can't talk about it, then nothing will change.
Right. And I actually got no comments, nothing. I mean, I posted it with the thought of hoping that we could start a conversation, not one.
No, but that's because everybody is uncomfortable with this conversation.
It's exactly why it's an uncomfortable conversation. It's exactly why you have to have it. If it's uncomfortable, you need to have the conversation.
Yeah, but see, here's the problem. If I'm comfortable, why do I want to be uncomfortable? Very few people want to be uncomfortable.
True.
Very few people see growth in discomfort.
But
right?
that's where all the growth comes from.
I understand that. And most of us worked hard to get to where we are. We're through with that discomfort and we're happy where we are. So why would I challenge myself anymore? And if I made it this far without having to have that particular discomfort, I think I can die before I have to deal with that particular discomfort. Now, when we start having intellectual digest or have been having the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, people don't see that when they talk race. And even if they think of Martin Luther King as an intellectual, they still see the dogs and the riots and the protests and the marches, and they don't want to be a part of that. So when you push their button by sending them resources that they would not have selected off of Amazon on their own, they think they're aiding and abetting somebody who really wants that in the end. They know no other way. And it's a shame we had to get there to even get that we had to do this even after the George Floyd. But that's because we've been disenchanted and unempowered. We have no other way of doing it.
So the concept of Black Lives Matter, little b, little l, little m, conceptually, I mean, it's been going on forever. But the Black Lives Matter movement, capital B, capital L, capital M movement, when and how long has that been around and organized? I mean, to me, it seems to have been top of mind just in the last 2 to 3 years, but I've got to believe it's been around longer than that.
The phrase itself is rather recent.
Okay.
For me, it's a perfect, this is the perfect antonym.
Okay.
To the actual situation.
Clarify.
Meaning that the phrase Black Lives Matters actually illustrates the environment where Black lives don't matter. It is not necessarily a plea, it's a reminder. All right.
And I mean, really, it should go without saying.
Of course it should. And that's what protesters try to use as the basis of their argument. They essentially are accusing those who use Black Lives Matter as a reminder as racist. They're accusing us of being reverse racist. The fact that we're promoting just one race when in fact we're defending the race. But once again, in order to attack the phrase, one must ignore or not accept the premise. And the premise of Black Lives Matter is they clearly don't matter in society. It's a reminder that if all life matters, you've got to include Black lives in that as well. And I have to say Black Lives Matter because the statistics say they don't.
So is the messaging on Black Lives Matter more directed towards the police side of it? Is it directed towards the person to person, the humanistic side of it? Or is it really a general statement that says, doesn't matter whether you're the police or another human being, Black lives matter, and they should be honored and respected in that fashion?
I'm sure that there are advocates for each of those positions.
Okay.
For me, it is a simple statement that has to be made.
It's a global statement.
It's a global statement. For me, it is a matter-of-fact statement that must be brought to the front of mind. And if you're upset about it, tough, because my people are dying.
Right.
And if Black Lives Matters makes a cop hesitate before he pulls the gun or pulls the trigger, then I'm going to say it all the time. I'm going to promote it all the time. But more importantly, I'm going to expose the discrepancy.
The issue has been a reality for 400 years. The movement has been a reality for a much shorter period of time. And the movement is what we really need to have a voice to continue to beat the drum and make sure people are aware and not let this continue to go back and forth between times where people aren't aware of these things. I mean, I think this constant need to be in the news in a positive fashion is really what Black Lives Matter movement is all about, is keeping awareness of the issues.
I think we're being too clinical. I don't think you can divide the movement from the issue. The movement is 400 years old too.
Okay. It just now has a name.
It just now has another name.
Okay, yes, true.
Okay. And I think we're focusing too much on the phrase.
Got it.
And the phrase is focusing on only one part of the movement.
Right.
All right. The entire movement is to accept us as human beings.
Right.
I don't want to get into whether we'll ever have a colorblind society or not. I don't care. What I care about is that you recognize that regardless of the color, we are human beings. And that movement has been occurring a lot longer than 400 years. That movement has been occurring from the moment somebody decided that there are less valued human beings that can be used to build the pyramids.
Right. So basically, right now in 2020, 2021 timeframe, the Black Lives Matter movement is front of mind because of the Breonna Taylor, George Floyd headlines. And when those stop, if they ever stop, hopefully they will, then maybe we're getting some progress in getting the world to understand that Black lives do matter.
Well, that depends on your definition of when those stop.
Yeah, well,
because people have been lynched, back in the 50s and 60s. Martin Luther King was shot.
Right.
Medgar Evers was shot. There have been hundreds of no notables except to their family and maybe their local community that have been shot. There have been people shot in between George Floyd and that we don't know about. And the fact that we don't know about it doesn't mean that it has stopped.
Right.
So we have to be careful about real progress.
Well, and let's just cut to the chase. Just because people stop getting shot doesn't mean that Black lives still don't matter.
That's true too. It just means that we've made life safer,
right,
for everybody by changing certain police techniques, right, and putting controls in. And even minorities want criminals caught.
Right.
And even minorities want law-abiding citizens to be protected. And so minorities are not asking for less policing in their neighborhoods. They're asking for effective policing in their neighborhoods.
It's a good blending of the discussion of Black Lives Matter and defunding the police, because
Absolutely.
defunding the police doesn't necessarily help the Black Lives Matter movement. In fact, it could be harmful if not done correctly. So what we really need, if I'm not incorrect, better education, better focus, redirection of funding, a different way of doing things that doesn't just take the money away from policing, but redirects the money towards appropriate policing.
This is where these phrases and slogans break down, because they're so polarized, and polarizing. When I hear you discuss defund the police, there is a part of me that says you still don't get it, and I don't mean that as an insult. That you're accepting the phrase as it is meant, as it is stated. Okay, when you say defund the police, that is not what was meant in the original phrase, but that is why it is such a ineffective phrase. There are people who are so sick and enraged by years of mistreatment by their police, their local police, that they are ready to totally defund the police and then start all over. But in the end, they want a system that works for them. And so the softer interpretation of defund the police is redistribution of resources, a retraining and adoption of different tactics. But some of us aren't patient enough for that. Some of us want as much disruption of the system as their lives have been disrupted.
If I'm not incorrect, the aggressive interpretation of defunding the police is to abolish the police. And that's not the solution.
Abolishing the police as it is
right.
a solution for us.
Us being Black people.
Yeah, us being minorities, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes. It eliminates the wanton, indiscriminate murder that's going on by police.
Right.
Under the guise of protecting society.
Right.
And some of us are that fed up. That is a desirable goal, because nobody's policing our neighborhoods anyway. Our barbershop owners and our grocery store owners and our beauty parlor owners and our small business owners in some cities are just as likely to be picked up and indiscriminately shot or harassed as our criminals are. And so because of that, we think we could survive while we were rebuilding the police department. Our lives wouldn't change that much.
So that's the extreme, the abolition.
Yes.
But there's got to be a happy medium somewhere.
Well, we would hope so. And I do believe there is. I know I'm creating a little discomfort here, but I need you to understand the depth of the rage, the depth of the impatience, the depth of the need to protect lives. This isn't just a governmental experiment to us.
Right.
This isn't just a trial and error approach that we need to be taking here. And unfortunately, we've moved to the point now that, again, because we are a deeply divided country, our discussions are very polarized, and it's hard to get to that middle.
I am understanding that from a Black perspective, defunding the police could be very positive. And then on the other extreme, I am sure that there are a lot of people who think that by abolishing or defunding the police, you're advocating for crime. Because speaking white privilege, I guess there's a lot of white people who feel that the police keep crime from occurring.
The moment you get to the point where you say there's no police, you stop thinking. Because in my description, I mentioned that after we defund the police, we then rebuild the police. And there's this abject fear of, well, what's going to happen during that period when there are no police? And that's when you notice the difference in the protection of the police. You're afraid of losing your protections. I get it, but then your interpretation is we're promoting crime. When we're saying we're not being protected, only you are being protected, we're getting killed. And you're saying, well, I understand that. So let's see what we can do to stop that. Let's make some incremental changes. I'm tired of waiting for the incremental changes.
Right.
My sons barely made it through adulthood. And now they're having to have the talk.
Right.
How long is it going to take for these incremental changes? Now, don't get me wrong. I personally believe that there's something short of total destruction of the police. But at the same time, I'm not talking about minor changes, and the kind of changes that most people are comfortable with do not address those policemen who are on payrolls now, who have multiple charges against them, and they've gotten away with it. And these changes allow them to still carry a gun. The guy that killed George Floyd, this wasn't his first encounter that was deemed extreme or outside police protocol, normal police protocol. And so on the one hand, we're talking about policing strategies in general. On the other, we're talking about the police themselves that get away with violating police strategies.
So policing the police needs to be a part of this process too, doesn't it?
Yeah, but policing the police is part of it, or the blue line, the blue code is part of it. It's not to say that I don't understand how difficult their job is either.
So just to help me wrap my arms around this conversation, the Black Lives Matter and the defund the police conversations are really very intimately integrated and need to be the conversations need to be held in parallel.
The conversations need to be integrated, not just held in parallel.
Okay.
Once again, this is about humanity.
Right.
This is a civics lesson, but it's real life.
Right.
Right. And so what we're talking about is, how does society move forward? How do you protect the gains of honest individuals who are playing by the rules, regardless of their color? We just happen to be talking about how do we handle the criminal element. We haven't even touched on how we handle investment in the community. There's no phrase about housing matters. There's no phrase about healthcare matters. We haven't even gotten there yet. We start at the basics. Why? Because deep down, we're talking about protecting the privileged. And so we have to come up with phrases that assault your sense of, that assault you, period. That assault your sense of equality. It assault your sense, your understanding of the way things are. You're afraid to empower a phrase like Black Lives Matter because in the land of Oz, and you've taught your kids all lives matter. You don't necessarily act that way. And I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about society. I'm talking about the systemic obstacles that separate us, regardless of our individual views. You know, I make enough money to own a home that a lot of my counterparts couldn't begin to afford. But I don't make enough money to own a home where you live. And that's an even greater disparity between those people that I just mentioned. And some of it is because they weren't given even a half a chance. Some of it is because of redlining. Some of it is because of the educational opportunities. You know, I wish we had a slogan for Black brains matter. You know, the best we got is a mind is a terrible thing to waste. But what I think the point I'd like to make is this is just a sliver of the discussion that we really should be talking about. Again, I don't mind talking about it but I'm not going to spend my life defending a phrase. When you and I started these conversations, it was primarily because we want to understand each other. We want to understand the impact that society had on us differentially. Maybe we can come up with some answers. And I know I've had an awakening about communication across this racial divide, for lack of a better word.
It's interesting. I was thinking the same exact two words.
Even though it's a social construct. That is what's so saddening about this. Race is a social construct. It's not scientifically based. It is a social construct that has corrupted nearly every aspect of society.
Well, and it's actually it's a caste concept as well, because in the United States it's a skin color, but in other countries it has nothing to do with the color of the skin. It just has to do with economic differences or even last name differences
or genealogy.
Right. So I appreciate the clarity on the Black Lives Matter discussion, and I also I think this discussion of defunding the police and Black Lives Matter, integrating the two in conversation is really the messaging that we should be working towards, is that this is by working together on those two conversations, we could get closer. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but get closer to some solutions.
If I could parse this a little more, the goal is to get you to understand the solution is much more complicated than we've even touched on, right? But first you have to get a groundswell that admits something's wrong.
Actually, you know what you need to do first, Phil? Is you need to have a conversation.
Yeah, that's true. And hopefully from out of that conversation, you'll come to the realization that something is actually wrong.
Right. Accepting there is a problem is the only way you can start to solve the problem.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.